George Goodwin may be the best friend Atlanta ever had. The seeds of lifelong friendship with the city were sown as a child as George grew up in West End.
His first friend was, I think, downtown Atlanta. He lived in the West End, and he commuted to Grady High, or Boys High, which is Grady High, by trolley, where he'd have to come from the West End through 5 Points, change, and then proceed down Peachtree Street.
Like so many of his generation, George served proudly in World War II. Aboard a PT boat as an intelligence officer, he gathered the facts and reported them to the necessary parties. Accuracy, understanding, thoroughness, and overall fortitude made George a success in the military and endured into the future at a time when Atlanta needed those qualities most.
They'd been in the front lines risking their lives for years in many cases, so this was sort of something they could do that other generations perhaps without that background couldn't do.
These traits followed him to the Atlanta Journal, where as a young reporter in 1947, George uncovered one of the great finds in Georgia journalism history. In Telfair County, it seems, the dead were alive and voting, in what became part of Georgia's famous Three Governors controversy of 1946.
He wrote a series on voter fraud in Telfair County where tombstones voted. People rose up from the dead to vote.
The story landed 30-year-old George a Pulitzer Prize, the first such award for the Journal. George's career later transitioned to public relations, but he always kept one foot in his journalistic roots and became a great source for many stories, including obituaries.
There was no reason in the world George Goodwin had to support somebody like me, but he did, because I mean to tell you, before the body got to Patterson's, George Goodwin was on the phone to me to tell me about this person, to regale me with stories about him. Some were funny, some had a little touch of the wicked funny to them, some were very serious.
In the 1960s, at a time when Atlanta and its leaders needed guidance the most, George became a trusted voice.
George is an incredible urbanologist. He understands urban situations.
So George was behind the scenes in a lot of these things. He wasn't the headline grabber. Dan Sweat was no headline grabber. Most people didn't know who he was. But these were the people behind the scenes that created the energy.
While other southern cities were struggling under the progress of the civil rights movement, Atlanta was enduring and thriving. City and business leaders decided it was time to sell Atlanta as the capital of the New South, the world's next great city, embracing growth and big business. They found their salesman in George and the campaign known as Forward Atlanta.
I would think it ran 4 or 5 years at least, and it really had an impact. 64 to the early 70s is Atlanta's spurt, and that was a large part of the spurt.
To begin to bring the community together and to think in terms of letting the world know that we're here. Through the 60s, we really took off, and we've been flying ever since.
George Goodwin's leadership on Forward Atlanta and a dynamic body of work, first with the firm of Bell and Stanton and its successor Manning, Selvage and Lee, make George the Dean of Public Relations in Atlanta. Because of George's own contributions to the community, the Atlanta office of Manning, Selvage and Lee awards the George Goodwin Community Grant to deserving nonprofits who need public relations and marketing services.
I think what makes the George Goodwin Grant really stand out as being remarkable is the fact that it provides a nonprofit organization with 2 years of invaluable professional services, which is like hitting the lottery for a nonprofit organization.
Few can rival George Goodwin's fondness for Atlanta. Few can boast a career with so much influence quietly asserted from behind the scenes. But many have certainly benefited from George's friendship with the city, and Atlanta could not have found a better pitchman.
I think that George's greatest accomplishment is Atlanta itself, and his hand in helping guide it and bringing people together.
That's what's important. And that's what will make Atlanta in the future what it has been in the past. The greatest days of Atlanta are just over the horizon.